July 18, 1968, 2:11 p.m., Quang Tri Province, South Vietnam. First Lieutenant Daniel Mercer steps out of the bamboo tree line and freezes. 34 North Vietnamese Army soldiers are staring at him. Some are holding AK-47s. Some are picking them up from a pile on the ground. 3 American soldiers kneel in the red dirt, hands tied behind their backs. Those men were guarding prisoners just 10 minutes ago. Now the prisoners are free, and Mercer just walked straight into them. A Vietnamese officer moves forward and presses the muzzle of a rifle into Mercer's chest. He shouts something in Vietnamese, sharp and angry. Mercer doesn't speak Vietnamese. The officer shouts again. Mercer looks at the 34 soldiers, looks at his 3 captured men, looks at the rifle jammed into his ribs, and he smiles. What happens next will take less than 1 minute. When it's over, 12 North Vietnamese soldiers will be dead. The rest will drop their weapons and surrender. And Daniel Mercer will walk out of the jungle alive. Daniel Thomas Mercer was born March 3, 1944, in Butte, Montana, a mining town carved into cold mountains and hard people. His father worked copper. His mother cleaned motel rooms. There was no money for college, no safety net, no future that didn't involve leaving. So he enlisted. In 1964, when Vietnam was still a place most Americans couldn't find on a map, Mercer signed his life away for a steady paycheck and a chance to become someone else. He went infantry. He was short, quiet, strong in the way men who grew up working are strong. Not gym strong, work strong. He learned to shoot, learned to move, learned how to keep his mouth shut and his eyes open. By 1967, he was in Vietnam with the 1st Cavalry Division, Air Mobile, the first unit in history designed to fight a war by helicopters. They dropped into jungles, mountains, rice paddies, anywhere the enemy was hiding. They didn't hold front lines. They hunted ghosts. By the time Mercer became a platoon leader, he had already seen things that never leave you. Ambushes, burned villages, friends cut apart by mortar fire, men screaming for medics that never came. Vietnam didn't care if you were brave. Vietnam only cared if you were unlucky. The war that never stopped. 1968 was the worst year. The Tet Offensive had shattered every illusion Americans still had about the war being almost over. The enemy was everywhere. Cities, jungles, villages that smiled at you during the day and shot at you at night. Mercer's unit was operating near the DMZ, the most violent strip of land in Vietnam. The North Vietnamese Army crossed it constantly, moving men and weapons south through hidden trails and jungle corridors. The mission was simple. Find them, fix them, kill them. On July 18th, he was leading a reconnaissance patrol, 8 men moving through dense jungle, checking a valley suspected of being a supply route. They walked straight into an ambush. The first burst of gunfire dropped 2 Americans instantly. The jungle erupted. Bullets tore through leaves and branches. Men dove for cover. Someone screamed. Mercer rallied his squad and fought them out. After 15 minutes of chaos, the firing stopped. 6 North Vietnamese soldiers were dead. 8 more were captured. 3 Americans were wounded. 2 would die before the medevac arrived. Mercer ordered the prisoners tied and placed under guard while the rest of the patrol established a perimeter. Then he went to check another ridgeline. That's when everything went wrong. While Mercer was gone, a North Vietnamese recovery patrol moved through the jungle. They saw their captured comrades. They attacked the American guards from behind. 3 Americans were overwhelmed, disarmed, and tied. The prisoners were free. Now the enemy had 34 armed men and 3 American captives. They were preparing to ambush Mercer's platoon from the rear, and Mercer had no idea. He came back through the brush, expecting to see prisoners on the ground and his men standing over them. Instead, he walked into the barrel of a rifle. The officer shouted again, furious. Mercer raised his hands slowly, as if surrendering. His rifle was slung across his chest. The officer relaxed slightly. That was the mistake. Mercer ripped the rifle free and fired point-blank into the officer's chest. The jungle exploded. The first shot folded the officer backward like a puppet with its strings cut. Mercer didn't stop. The M16 bucked in his hands, short, controlled bursts tearing into the men closest to him. At this range, there was no such thing as a miss. Jungle leaves shredded. Bodies dropped. Someone screamed. For half a second, the North Vietnamese soldiers didn't understand what was happening. The American had been surrendering. Now he was killing them. Mercer pivoted, firing as he moved. Training took over. Sight, trigger, recoil, shift, fire again. A bullet slammed into his left shoulder, spinning him halfway around. He ignored it. Pain didn't matter. Stopping did. "Take their guns," he yelled in English. The 3 American prisoners tore at their ropes. One got free, grabbed a fallen AK and fired wildly. Another picked up a pistol from a dead soldier. The clearing became a killing ground. The NVA tried to form a line. They never got the chance. Mercer emptied his magazine, dropped it, slammed in another with hands that moved faster than thought. He shot a man who was trying to raise a machine gun, shot another who was dragging himself behind a log, shot a third who was screaming orders no one could hear anymore. Men fell in every direction. After less than a minute, the jungle went quiet. 12 North Vietnamese soldiers lay dead. 5 more were bleeding in the dirt. The rest had dropped their weapons and raised their hands. Mercer stood in the center of it all, breathing hard, blood running down his arm, staring at men who had been seconds away from killing everyone he commanded. "Don't move," he said. They didn't. When Mercer's platoon reached the clearing, they thought they had walked into the aftermath of an airstrike. Bodies, smoke, the smell of cordite and blood. Mercer gave his report like it was any other contact. Enemy attempted prisoner recovery. Repelled. The officers above him did not see it that way. The story traveled fast. An American officer captured by the enemy, smiling at a rifle in his chest, then killing a dozen men and retaking his platoon. By the time Mercer was evacuated for his shoulder wound, his name was already being passed up the chain of command. In Vietnam, bravery was common. What Mercer did was something else. The war keeps moving. Mercer returned to duty 3 weeks later. His arm still hurt. He still couldn't sleep. None of that mattered. The jungle didn't pause. He led patrols. He survived ambushes. He lost men. He kept going. In 1970, he rotated home. The war stayed behind, but it never really did. In 1971, Daniel Mercer stood in Washington, D.C., wearing a uniform that felt too clean, too quiet. A general pinned a medal to his chest. The words were read aloud. While facing overwhelming enemy forces and certain death, Lieutenant Mercer engaged and destroyed the enemy, saving the lives of his captured men and preventing the annihilation of his platoon. Mercer nodded. That was all. Daniel Mercer did not come home to applause. He came home to silence. America in 1970 did not know what to do with men like him. The country was tired of the war. Protesters filled the streets. Flags burned. Veterans were either ignored or treated like ghosts from something everyone wanted to forget. The jungle was still in his lungs, still in his dreams, but nobody asked about it. Nobody wanted to hear. So Mercer put it away. He went back to Montana, back to Butte, back to a life that smelled like diesel and wet earth instead of cordite and blood. He took a job as a heavy equipment mechanic for a copper mining company, the same industry that had fed his town for generations. 10 hours a day, he tore down engines, rebuilt transmissions, crawled under machines that weighed more than houses. It was hard, honest work. If something broke, you fixed it. If it couldn't be fixed, you replaced it. It made more sense than war ever did. He married a woman named Elaine in 1972. She knew he had been in Vietnam. Everyone did. But she also knew better than to push. Some nights he woke up drenched in sweat, breathing like he was still running through jungle under fire. When she asked what he had dreamed about, he would say, "Just noise," and she learned that was the end of the conversation. They had a son, then a daughter. Mercer coached Little League baseball. He fixed neighbors' trucks. He went to church on Sundays and sat in the back. To everyone around him, he was just another quiet working-class man with strong hands and tired eyes. The medal stayed in a drawer. When the Army sent him letters asking if he would attend ceremonies, speak at veteran events, give interviews, he declined. Not rudely, just simply, "No thank you." He did not believe he was special. He believed he had done what had to be done, and that the men who didn't come home had paid more than he ever had. But inside the military, his name never faded. At Fort Benning, instructors told his story to new officers, not as a fairy tale, as a lesson. What do you do when you are outnumbered, cut off, and about to be killed? What do you do when the enemy thinks they already own you? You do not wait, you do not beg, you act. In Vietnam, a war filled with confusion and moral gray, Mercer's moment stood out because it was brutally simple. 3 Americans were about to die. A platoon was about to be wiped out. One man changed the math. Years passed. The war ended. The world moved on. Mercer got older. His hair went gray. His hands stiffened. The shoulder that had taken the bullet in Quang Tri never quite worked right. He retired from the mine in the late 1990s, spent his mornings drinking coffee on the porch, watching the mountains, listening to the wind move through the pines. Sometimes, very rarely, someone would recognize his name. A younger veteran, a historian, an officer who had read the citation. They would ask about it. He would shrug. "I got lucky," he would say. But luck had nothing to do with it. Luck doesn't reload a rifle in the time it takes to blink. Luck doesn't keep shooting when blood is running down your arm. Luck doesn't stand still when the gun is already pressed into your ribs. What happened in that jungle was not luck. It was a man refusing to be owned by the moment. Daniel Mercer died in the winter of 2014. Snow covered the mountains outside the hospital window. Elaine held his hand. His son and daughter stood nearby. When he went, it was quiet, the way he would have wanted. They buried him with a folded flag. The jungle where it happened is gone now, cleared, regrown, burned, and grown again. The clearing where 12 men died and 1 man lived has no marker, no plaque, no sign, just trees and insects and heat. But stories do not need monuments. They live where courage lives, in the moments when someone decides that surrender is not an option, even when everything says it should be. That is what Daniel Mercer left behind. Not a speech, not a book, not a name everyone knows. Just 1 minute in a jungle in 1968 when a man smiled at death and refused to go with it. The jungle never left Daniel Mercer. It stayed in the way he woke up before dawn, heart already racing before his eyes opened. It stayed in the way loud sounds made his shoulders tighten. It stayed in the way he always chose a seat facing the door in any room, even decades after he stopped carrying a rifle. People think the war ends when you come home. It doesn't. It just moves inside you. For Mercer, Quang Tri became a place that existed everywhere, in the hiss of a steam valve, in the crack of splitting wood, in the smell of wet earth after rain. Each one could pull him back to that clearing, to the moment when 34 rifles had been aimed at his chest and time had almost stopped. He never told his children about the smile. They knew he had been in Vietnam. They knew he had been wounded. They knew he had a medal somewhere in the house, but they never knew the details. Not the kneeling prisoners, not the officer's eyes when he realized he had lost control, not the way the jungle went silent after the shooting ended. Some memories are too sharp to pass on. Every July 18th, Mercer drove into the mountains alone. He didn't call it a ritual. He didn't mark it on a calendar, but he never missed it. He would park his truck on a dirt road that overlooked a valley and sit with the engine off, listening to the wind move through the trees.
In Vietnam, that wind had carried screams. In Montana, it carried only pine and snow. He would sit there and count, not numbers, faces. The 3 Americans who had been on their knees, the Vietnamese officer, the men who had raised their rifles, the men who had dropped them. 12 bodies in the dirt. 1 minute that separated everything before from everything after. He didn't hate them. That surprised people when they heard it. "I don't hate them," he once said to a fellow veteran. "They were doing what they were told, same as me." What he hated was the moment when the world tried to decide who got to live. In the Army, his story became a case study, not because it was dramatic, but because it was pure. No air support, no backup, no clever trick, just a man under a gun deciding that surrender was worse than action. Cadets at West Point read the citation. Most of them imagined themselves in Mercer's place. Very few understood what it really meant. It meant accepting that you were already dead and moving anyway. In Vietnam, old villagers near Quang Tri still told stories about a strange battle in the jungle, a moment when their soldiers had taken prisoners and then suddenly everything went wrong. They did not know Mercer's name. They only knew that something had broken the flow of the war for a heartbeat. Even the enemy remembered. Mercer grew old. His hands shook sometimes. His back hurt. He walked slower, but his eyes never changed. They stayed alert, focused, watching. On the day he died, Elaine found the medal in the drawer where he had kept it for 40 years. It was heavy, cold, untouched by time. She realized that he had carried more weight in his silence than in any piece of metal. At his funeral, there were no speeches about heroism, just stories about fishing trips, broken tractors, bad jokes, and a man who always showed up when someone needed help. That was how he wanted it. Because the truth about courage is not that it makes you famous, it makes you quiet. Somewhere in Vietnam, the jungle has grown over the clearing where Daniel Mercer changed the math. The leaves have reclaimed the ground. The insects hum. The war is gone, but the choice remains. A man faced with death, a smile, and a refusal to kneel. That is how legends are born. Not with applause, but with a single step forward when everything says to fall.